Okay. I heard a little bit about that. Debbie. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the May 18th, 2021 meeting, special meeting of the Onalaska Common Council. The time is 6 p.m. and the notices were mailed and posted. Continue with the roll call.
Mayor Kim Smith,
Here.
Tom Smith,
Here.
Jim Olson,
Here.
Dan Stevens,
Present.
Diane Wolf,
Here.
Stephen Knott,
Present.
Carrie Burmaster. Here.
Thank you. That is everyone. Item 2 is public input. If there is anyone here from the public who would like to provide input, now is the time to do so. Please state your name and your address and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Would anyone like to address the Common Council this evening? Second chance. If anyone would like to address the Common Council, now is the time to do so. You have anyone, Amanda? Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing anyone, so we'll move on. Consideration and possible action on the following items. We'll start with item 5, the development agreement with traditional trades. We have a request from staff to refer this.
Point of order, Mayor, should we do the pledge or anything like that?
Well, it's
That's
not on the agenda,
but-
we can do the pledge if you want. Sorry. So regarding item 5, development agreement with traditional trades, we'd like to refer that to the regular June Common Council meeting. I'd like to entertain a motion to do so.
I'll make a motion to move the traditional trades development agreement to the June Common Council meeting.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor by Carrie Burmaster, seconded by Jim Olson to refer item 5, the development agreement, to the June council meeting. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed say no. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Item 3, establish council budget goals and objectives for the 2022 budget. I'll turn it over to our city administrator, Eric Reinflesch. Eric?
Thank you. Sent on Friday and included in the email for everyone on Friday was the updated list of requests that the council put together, emailed today. Steve Knott wished to add 2 more, which was emailed today for everybody. And this is the opportunity that staff, in particular myself, is looking for from the council to discuss the issues that you would like to see put into the 2022 budget for the city of Onalaska, in particular the general fund. Obviously, the next steps is based on this input, work with the department heads, put a memo together, directing department heads to assemble their budget to meet these particular goals. I then take that and assemble the full budgets, present it to the council later in the year for further debate. The intent here is to make sure that whatever that final budget is meets the overall overarching goals that the council has for itself. So the items there are basically 4 items. I can review them if you'd like, bit by bit, answer questions you'd like. As you see, we have staff here wanting to answer some questions about them as well. And if you'd like a different path, please interrupt. Otherwise, I will begin. So question number 1, are there any 2021 budget items that you'd like to see adjusted up or down for 2022? And if so, by how much? So the ideas that were given to me by council members were the cost of living increases for all staff to keep up with rising costs. No, it's not the current version. Hold on.
Did you just lose it, Eric?
No, I have the old version here.
Okay.
I'm just grabbing.
You're
the-
working off of the May
you.
14th one. I could read it.
Yes, I did just lose it.
I was trying to figure out what to do to help you.
Yep, yeah, we're good. And thank you, Joanne.
Joanne, covered.
So the cost of living increases for all staff to keep up with rising costs. At the time, the cost of living increases, when I first presented this, were as of March, CPIU was at 2.6%, which is higher than it has been historically in the last several years. Actually, since then, it's been updated for April at 4.2%. So it's just a much CPIU jump. Again, that's the 12-month average for CPIU. So that's April through April of 2020, 2021. I do have a little brief note there that I do not believe that CPI will stay that high at the end of the year at 4.2%. Keep in mind, a year ago, you could get a gallon of gas for less than $1 at some places. So, knowing where we were a year ago to where we are, that speaks for the significant increase that we've had. But I do think that there's been some substantial changes in the workforce and the economy that will indicate a higher CPI than we've had in most recent years. The other issue that we're dealing with is to avoid wage compression issues between union and non-union employees. The council funded in 2020 a compensation study, and one of the key ideas there was to make sure that we had equity across various departments and avoid any compression issues that we've had historically by the unions getting a particular set of increases and the non-union staffs getting less than that.
Could I just interject? And I just want to make sure, because we won't know what the CPIU is when we're actually doing the budget, but I would like to make sure that we keep it at least 2.25, because that is what one of the contracts at least has settled here. And it does create that compression in wages if we don't keep pace with what we've already given the union staff.
Alder Stevens?
So for the cost of living, we would call that COLA, which would be separate from the step increases. How is that, how do we figure that versus, is it tied to the CPIU, or is that a different number that we come up with?
No, generally what we've been looking at for the cost of living increases, which adjusts the entire compensation plan. So same employee doing the same work year one to the next year would get the COLA based off of CPIU. And we generally use the October dates as the latest one that we can get for rolling average. Step increases are based on performance, and that is the chart with the 11 steps now. So you have to be a sufficient performer in your job to get then that incentivized to get that next step through.
So for the cost of living aspect, though, I mean, we have that's inherent in our current policy is that we have COLA increases, right? I guess I don't understand the
It would be
variance.
inherent in the budget. There is no policy that guarantees that.
We consider it independently each year.
So this item is just kind of, what is that number going to be? And how do we normally figure that number?
What I've historically done was use the October CPIU, and in the budget process, update that number, use that number for the COLA increases, apply that to the budget, and then give that budget document to the council. Again, this is the opportunity, though. That's a policy decision. Do you wish to have CPI applied every year or not? So having the conversation now avoids the removal of that perhaps later on if that's an issue.
Okay. Alder Knott?
Yeah, so again, first off, I certainly would like, based on resources, like us to be able to meet CPIU as much as possible. However, there's a danger if we were to create a policy that links any type of COLA to CPIU, because any revenues that the city receives isn't normally going to match what the CPIU is. Whatever we determine we're going to do for a cost of living increase needs to be tied to resources first and foremost, and not to other data. The CPIU should be informing that decision, but not determining that decision. That's just my view.
Thank you for your input. Alder Wolf?
Thank you, Your Honor. So Eric, what was the COLA that was given for 2021? Or Fred?
Hey, Fred, you happen to know that one offhand?
0.
2020, that's right. 2021, there was no COLA initiated because the compensation plan was to establish wages at a already competitive rate.
Thank you.
In previous years, it's been 1.25, 1.5, depending on whatever CPI fell.
Thank you.
If the CPI were to be a negative number, if we tied it, then wages would probably go down. I think that would be a reason why not to tie it exactly.
In the absence of a policy, that would be a budget decision that the council need to make. And again, we do not have a policy that automatically establishes that CPI as a fixed rate.
So you put that in October? Is that kind of when you would project this at this time, or because we don't know right now what it's going to be?
Yeah, generally, you will get a budget from me prior to that with CPI, and then in the changes that between the initial document that you get and the final document when you vote, there are often changes made.
Okay.
That's one of those changes made to get
So it's
to the
gonna adjust
current
it either way.
CPIU.
Okay, thank you.
For example, when you get the budget, we have to make estimates on insurance rates and other fixed costs that we don't know yet until we get those numbers from various departments of the state. So those are some of those changes later on that the council gets and approves before it gets makes the final decision.
Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is regarding item 1A, we have multiple guidelines to look at, but it will be something that we can determine as it gets closer. We're not going to be able to set that or set even a policy, but just to consider the variables as it approaches. And I think everything that the people brought up were all valid concerns to consider.
Okay.
Does that give you enough direction for that one, Eric?
It does.
Okay.
Number B would be for increasing currently budget items. Utilize the compensation plan to ensure overall wage competitiveness and make adjustments if necessary. This is a little bit different than COLA, which would be, again, your same job, the same wage increase just for the cost of living. This is using the plan now to identify true competitiveness in the marketplace on an annual basis. As in 2020, when the comp plan was established, you're basically using 2019 wages as a comparison because, again, they're getting the information during 2020 to put this together. But the current recruitment will tell you that regardless of the salary range right now, from finance director, which we'll talk about later this evening, to even, I would say more entry level positions, we're having a tough time recruiting. And so it does call into question the overall rates that we have in the marketplace. Beyond that, this also references on individual basis, make sure that we may have individuals that would have demand for the services are also being paid at a competitive rate here to retain versus having to recruit.
Alder Smith?
Eric, didn't we, if I remember right, we gave everybody a bump up, not everybody, but there were people that were adjusted last year in the 2020 budget, but there were some that were short. I mean, that we didn't get them to where they should be in the minimum, if I remember right. I don't know how many there were, but there were some of that. Is that going to be addressed as part of this?
What Alder Smith is referring to is everyone made an adjustment to be within a competitive range, but we could not fund the competitive range based on experience for each position. So our longstanding employees may have been moved to a standard number, but those that had been here perhaps over 10 years, while they moved to a competitive range, it didn't reflect their length of service, is what you're referencing. So yes, that can be something that the council would request me to look at as part of this compensation plan to ensure overall that's absolutely something we can look at.
And I know it's a financial thing, but I think we can't lose sight of that because we worried about that last year, that let's not forget that, because otherwise we're always going to be behind. And that's the whole idea with that compensation, is to try to be a little bit more competitive and keep things moving in the right direction. So hopefully we can do that, but I guess we'll see when the numbers come.
Alder Knott?
And just as far as, we always have more wants and needs than resources. I would actually rate this personally as a higher priority than even the COLA, at least on the short term anyway, to get us, immediately on a competitive line with everyone else.
Thank you. Alder Burmaster?
I also want to state that I think this is an important one because we have problems with retention. I said we're having, employees leave and that's a problem. So like I said, this is something that would reward those people for being here for those years of service and hopefully be an incentive for them to stay.
I agree with that in terms of if we can't recruit at our current rates, that means someone else can recruit, someone else is recruiting at a higher rate, which means our own employees would be subject to being curious about those higher rates. So what does it cost to be competitive and to retain those employees here?
Thank you. Any other comments on item B? Okay, we'll move on then to item C, increased staffing in the parks.
Item C is also the same type of request that falls in number 2A down below, but it calls the question with the layoffs that occurred last year, ensuring that we have adequate staffing in the parks for the park maintenance positions. That's how I understood the comments to be.
Alder Knott?
I think, again, I know you're looking for direction here, and that's just my own personal opinion, but this one, out of many of them that are here, would also rate very, very high. I've talked to some folks who I'm not going to actually mention here, but I've just done some probing off the impacts of what happened with the layoffs from last year, and I know that there is a significant workload increase that I'm concerned that if we don't address, we may actually lose some people because, nobody likes to be worked at that level for a indefinite amount of time.
Thank you. Alder Stevens?
I would actually like to hear from Dan Wick, if he could touch on the impact. Have staff been able to keep up? Have we been sacrificing quality, or how have we been managing with the upkeep of our parks?
So with the return of our seasonal staff that's happened, we've called some seasonals back earlier than they normally come back to try to keep up with it. There's definitely things that are not getting done in the timely manner that it has been done in the past. We're doing the best to keep up. We've brought on the same number of seasonal staff that we've had. We've got 2 park employees down there that are extremely dedicated, that have been picking up extra to do what they can to try to, make sure the public sees as little of change than we have in the past. But we do have a few volunteers that have stepped forward to help us in a couple of different locations at Dash Park and the Great River Landing to continue to help us try to provide a great service to the community.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, Alder Knott.
But just to clarify, these are seasonal, that some point in the late summer, early fall, we will lose that.
Correct. This time of year is one thing we're able to get through the winter months of snow removal and those things by adding on responsibilities to others, looking at everything that was done. Our bigger concern is probably going to come August, September, when the grass is still growing. All of our seasonals are either out of hours or back at school to what's going to happen at that time.
I just want to make a small comment. I think, not that this isn't appropriate, because I think it is, but I think that every department is working to its optimum with the least amount of staff as possible. So I just want us to be really careful that we don't start to put the department heads on the spot, like trying to justify why their position is maybe more. I don't want it to be perceived like one department head has to say their position is more important than another department's position that they may need as well. Because all of the departments could probably use more help than what they already have. Okay, anything else on item C? Eric? No? Okay. Item D, continue to streamline workflow and tasks to avoid staffing redundancies across multiple departments.
Would believe that this commentary is referencing sort of the functional approach that I'm preaching to staff, is to look at, the type of tasks that are similar across departments, can be best staffed perhaps in better ways than separating and dividing, conjoining and compiling may make more sense for some of those staffing redundancies. I'll let, if the elder wishes to speak on that one, please do so. My statement on this would be that this is something that's a consistent search for me since I've been here and will continue to be here regardless of agendas, is because there's always, a battle for limited resources that we have. So make sure that we utilize those resources to the best of our ability is something that I will always continue to pursue.
Thank you. Alders, anything? Okay. Want to just go ahead, Eric?
Sorry?
You want to just go ahead? We're
sure.
on E.
E then is increased funding for Santa parades and make it an annual event. So, we hit a nerve with our presentation, and so all those that were involved in putting that together, I think. I'd like to see that one. As we mentioned, there was no budget for it last year, and I believe the request here would be to make sure that we fund it so that we can advertise it and market it as an annual event. And again, this would be where Santa on the Parks and Rec vehicle was driven around. And is that a secret? I don't know. I don't want to divulge who Santa is.
People know already.
All right. Thank you, Tom, for being Santa. I appreciate that, stepping in there. And,
It's not a secret.
as well.
Question on that though, it was, with the cost probably would be overtime, right? For folks driving the truck around, gas. What kind of budget are we talking about? Or maybe Dan could speak for that. I know Santa was a volunteer,
I
which was
think in a
fine.
non-COVID year, we could do it more efficiently.
Yeah. Each time it got pretty better.
Yeah, the employees that participated through the Park and Rec side were all salaried employees, so there was no wages for them, just some extra long days of doing it. There was some other departments that I believe did bring staff in on overtime to make it happen. Staff, we have been discussing it extensively on how we can improve it, how we can, maybe streamline it to not do 6 nights. Can we shorten it? Do we do it during a different time? So it is something that we are actively discussing and looking at. So.
Okay. I gotta figure it wouldn't be too much. It would just be more of the volunteer. The time is, okay. Thank you.
Bruce Stevens?
So the feedback that I received from people with the Santa Parade was, it was overwhelmingly positive, but what we don't know is that just because there was nothing happening going on, or was this something that could kind of take root and become an Onalaska tradition? I'd like to see it continue at least this year. And if it's becomes something that we want to do regularly, I think we need to deck out the float, put a heater on it, and maybe some sort of cover to protect Santa and Mrs. Claus and potentially some elves from the elements. But I agree, having a
Heater for
shorter,
sure.
having maybe 3 days as opposed to, so maybe 1 per district and a shorter route would make it a little bit more manageable.
We did have staff as Mrs. Claus as well. And from what I heard, how cold it was, that perhaps a heater would be.
A heater would work really good.
Okay, Alder Knott?
Yeah, so, I got only positive response as well. I think it's a good idea to continue and become a tradition. Contrarian view, I actually think fire truck is the way to go because it also communicates additional messages to the community as well. Doesn't mean I'm not opposed to trying to figure out a heating situation. But I think that is a real good visual of city services being present to the public as well. So.
Okay, thank you everyone for your feedback. Eric, why don't you just go ahead? I feel like it's,
Not on my note, but sent today. Steve Knott would like to add a 1F, which is Onalaska participation in regional funeral services for fallen police officers and firefighters.
Actually, yeah, I think it would be a 1J. It goes on to the next page. I obviously got quick on that, but yeah. So I can explain it. I did go out in an email today. I'm sorry, I meant to send that out on Friday, but I had a daughter graduating at a party to get ready to, and I just was totally, but anyway, this would actually be a small, I'm sorry, yes, 1F. All right. Yeah, this would be small dollars, I think, overall. After the award ceremony this last week, I just asked the question of whether or not the city of Onalaska currently does this. It's a very common practice that communities will show their support to fallen firefighters, police officers by sending a representation in uniform to those funerals. I think you've probably all seen that on television at some point or other. I guarantee you that if we were to have that type of a tragedy here inside of our community, you would see 100 or even hundreds of uniformed people coming from across the region, not just the state of Wisconsin, coming in to support us. And I think that we need to spend some small dollars to create that situation where we can help that. I do think there needs to be some constraints. I mean, I'm not sure we should be, and I'm being facetious here, but it gets the point across. I don't think we should be sending, you know, a city employee out to Wyoming on the taxpayer dime, you know, as one example. But I think there's probably a reasonable limit on travel to include a per diem reimbursement, and that we could consider. I put down on the proposal 210 miles. I chose that for a specific reason, and that's number one. It's about 3.5-hour drive, so it's doable safely, and that includes one stop on the way. And it also allows you to get to like Milwaukee, Green Bay, down into Madison, Rockford, over into not only La Crescent and then up into Minneapolis as well. So, and a good portion of Iowa. So it's something I think that would only cost, I don't know, I'm guessing maybe $1,500 a year annually, and of course adjusted for inflation over time. And there would be an upfront cost. I understand we do not have everything we would need for an honor guard component. Now, we don't be sending honor guards out to a lot of these. You'd send one individual in uniform with a patch. But if we were to have a tragedy in our local area, especially within the communities that we have mutual support agreements with, that would be a, you know, several hour commitment where we'd send an honor guard out, you know, say in, you know, again, the place we have the mutual support agreements, you're talking La Crescent, La Crosse, Holman. We have quite a few actually within the local area. So that's what that is.
thank you. Any questions or comments on that? Alder Stevens?
I'll have two questions. So was this, did you get any feedback from the, either the chiefs on this?
Yes, I did speak with Chief Ashbeck when I asked the question of, do we do this? And he said, no, we don't. But he said that's something he thinks that the police department would find more than enough people to support.
And then the following is, how did you come up with 3,000 and 1,500? Is that?
Well, again, it was based on, it's just best guesses. I mean, we were supposed to provide some type of monetary figure for all of these proposals. The $1,500 I figured would probably be about 3 trips a year, including per diem. Thankfully, we don't have police officers and firefighters being killed on duty on too often of a basis here in the state of Wisconsin, for an example. We'd have to probably adjust this as we learn over time, but it still would be small dollars. And that also allows an additional $1,500-ish or so in order to outfit an honor guard for a more local tragedy.
Thank
That would be a one-time expense.
Sure. Thank you.
And I've got a question for Eric, just maybe you could verify too. The only thing that I'm worried about is I know we have our out-of-state travel policy. And does that conflict with this? Because I think this would give us a wider perimeter if we would go out of state. And what our travel policy allows currently.
In-state, it would. Minnesota's included as in-state and just.
But is it the whole state or is it a mile radius?
I believe it's the whole state. But Iowa's not.
Iowa would not be
which is interesting.
included.
It's not that far away either.
Yes, I mean,
so.
I think we have some other policies that might conflict with us a little bit, so that might need to be looked at if you intended that to be included.
Okay, understand. And we could do an exception as well, just for this specific purpose too. I mean, I don't know what 100% of the right answer is. Again, I just started thinking about this in a conversation this last Wednesday. So, but I would like us to consider having a solution when we look at the budget.
I think if we kind of have the idea, we can work out what the
Right.
policy needs to
Exactly.
be. Alder Stevens?
I think I'm thinking about this, and if we're looking at an annual commitment, I think I looked at Milwaukee and that was 207 miles away. Sending police officers and units far out, like out of Alaska with an annual commitment. My thought is if it doesn't provide infrastructure, nor amenities, nor actually provide public safety, we have to justify why we're spending the $1,500. So this is kind of it's a symbolic gesture. If something were to happen in Holman or La Crosse or Toma or something like that, absolutely. I kind of question how far we draw that line. And before we commit to that, I'd like to hear, I guess from, in this case, Chief Ashbeck, that if they had an additional $1,500 in their budget, that this is the best use of that. I mean, I'm not saying no, but I'd like to hear the department's view on, is this how they would spend an extra $1,500?
Chief Ashbeck, are you available?
I am. Good evening. Thank you. I guess that's a difficult question, Alderman Stevens. I certainly see value in this idea, as Alderman Nod had brought up. I think there's true value to, we are going to receive a lot of support from agencies all over if we have a tragedy such as this. So it's nice to be able to reciprocate. But I know resources are tight, so that's a difficult question to answer, whether this is, the best idea I would spend $1,500 on. I mean, I would like to see this go forward. But I can't give you a definitive, I guess. We have a lot of needs and I'm not prepared to answer that.
We can give it some thought.
Thank you, Chief. Alder Wolf.
Thank you, Your Honor. Fire Chief Goody is also in the audience. I think he was kind of leading, expecting maybe something to have a walk up. So I'm just wondering if, my question to you, Chief, would be, I know I picked this email up late this afternoon, so I called both chiefs to kind of get a little bit of background, kind of see where they were at with this. So have you had occasion in all years here?
Yes, we currently do participate by going out of town. Usually it's voluntarily our off-duty firefighters, the union firefighters would go. We have Class A uniforms that we wear with the patch, everything that you talked about. If we had something local, like we had one in La Crescent, and I would authorize that we take a fire truck over that's requested, then I would view that as a paid event because we're in city vehicles. But yes, we've participated in many of them. I don't know the distances, but most of the time the guys would just ask if they could wear their Class A uniform and represent the Onalaska Fire Department.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you, Chief. And as a follow-up, I guess I could certainly support this item. I'm just wondering if this is more the category of the two chiefs, police and fire, kind of coming together. And I guess I'm not looking to micromanage it. I think they should just, if it isn't violating any type of a travel policy, that I'm not really sure if we need to dedicate any dollars, or, I mean, if they're already participating, I guess I'm going to trust my heads to go ahead and if they're not violating any current policy, I'm not really sure if we have to invest any additional dollars?
I was under the impression, again, I did not have an opportunity to talk to fire, but I was under the impression from talking to Chief Ashbeck that Onalaska is not currently participating within the police department. But additionally, though, yeah, again, this, I did in my notes say this is quote unquote voluntary. I mean, you would have police or fire who would saying that they'd be willing to do it. But I think that if there was a per diem travel expense reimbursement, you might give people who are more likely to want to do it, and not especially if it's further away.
Okay, thank you. I think we have, is it Chief Ashbeck maybe?
I guess I just wanted to add from a legal consideration standpoint, when we start talking about reimbursing people, we have to look at the legal considerations of whether we're creating a job duty at which, because we're reimbursing them, then it's really becoming part of their job. And then we would have to factor in overtime considerations. So, I mean, just as you're thinking about that, keep that in the back of your head as well.
I do know that there are a great many departments all over the country that have figured out how to get around the overtime aspect. So I agree that needs to be resolved, but I think there is a resolution to that.
Okay, it seems like we have enough information to give that further consideration as we move forward. Eric?
As we wrap up item number 1, which again are 2021 budget items that you'd like to see adjusted, I guess I would ask if the council has anything else to add at this point before we move on to number 2, which would be new initiatives or staffing requests. Okay, seeing none, I'll move on. Number 2, list any new initiatives or staffing requests you have for 2022 and approximate new costs. Again, number A was the new Parks and Rec maintenance employee. We discussed that earlier under 1C. 2B would be the community engagement position. And today Alder Knott also expanded upon his idea. I think probably best if I would turn it over to you.
Yeah, so again, when I saw that, I totally agreed that that would be a good thing to consider for the future. Whether or not we can afford it this next year or not, we'll have to see. I would actually, again, I have a couple higher priorities, but I'm thinking maybe expanding on that. What I have there is that this community engagement position could actually become more of a communications director type of a position, where it wouldn't just be community engagement. It would be strategic communications, public affairs, marketing, the social media aspect, where it would ultimately fall under one directorate that is coordinating all the other marketing, advertising functions within the city. It kind of ties into the question I had at our meeting last week for Dan, where I was asking about the marketing person out at the Omni Center. In this case, that person would still remain in the Omni Center, for instance, and what I have going in my head. However, they'd actually be working for this person eventually. And that way you have unified messages, reinforcing messages. You've got public affairs responses ready to go for both good or bad things that occur within the city. Now, I understand that this, by incorporating all that, number one, this would be a higher paid position almost surely, because this is some pretty specific skill sets we're asking for. And number two, we would never find anyone who is, had gone through some type of certification in all of these areas, and very unlikely to have experience in all of these areas, because they're actually fairly distinct from each other. Marketing is not the same thing as advertising. Stratcom certainly is not the same thing as community engagement, et cetera. But it's just, I see that it's something that we're lacking here in the city, that we don't have that right now in a unified fashion. What we have is the directors kind of taking it on their shoulders and just doing it, but to the best of their ability, and that's admirable. That's kind of where I was going with maybe perhaps expanding on that.
Thank you. Any other comments on that? Alder Burmaster, and then Eric after that.
I would just like to add too, with your expansion of that, with including the unified social media messages and stuff, we have always been lacking that in the EOC. So that would be another duty that I would like to see included in there, because everybody has their specific duties down there, and we don't have one person that's dedicated to maybe send out Facebook posts or, updating that information for the citizens, should we have that emergency situation. And I think that could be beneficial for us in that also.
Mhm. Yeah, big time.
Thank you. My comment on the community engagement position, a bit of history to keep in mind is that there was a fund set aside in the 2021 budget for a part-time community engagement position, as well as a part-time paralegal position. We were unsuccessful in recruiting a part-time paralegal position. Council then allowed us to adjust those funds to a full-time paralegal position with the understanding that we would make attempts to, with that position, also do the marketing and the online newsletter and what have you as well. So my understanding from this commentary is, first and foremost, let's fill the position that during 2021 as best as possible, complete those tasks, the mission of tasks that we had assigned to that position, but as well as look forward into 2022 to make sure that there's a focus on that community engagement.
Any other comments or questions on that? Alder Stevens?
Thank you, Your Honor. I recall when we were first coming up with the idea, the primary impetus of this was having some sort of outreach to the community that was essentially just in the form of a newsletter. It could go out by email or it could be posted on the website. Something that could be monthly or bi-monthly. And now it seems like it's growing into a director level position and a highly paid job. My preference would be to, I think that this could be a part-time job where let's just start with a newsletter and engage our needs. If there's ways that can grow, then we can explore that. But right now we're not doing any of that. So let's crawl before we, walk and then run. Especially if we can fill this this was a part-time position. It was half of the paralegal. And I realized that wasn't the reality, that how are you going to find somebody that's a paralegal and a social media expert? But I think that if we look, we can find somebody that can at least do what we need to start this program. And then if need merits, then grow it, rather than start with a director level position and then find out that we're spending too much money on that and then have to cut that. Because we've heard that there's other things that should be a priority. Let's not break the bank on this one.
Okay, Alder Wolf?
Thank you, Your Honor. So if I could just get a little bit of clarification, just for the record, I was the one who asked to have 2B, the community engagement position, put on here. Not necessarily as a new position, but that I didn't want the position and the possible suggested previous duties to be loose, so we don't all lose sight of that position and what the intention was. So I just want to just confirm, I pulled the January F&P minutes. I just want to confirm, so the paralegal administrative assistant position ended up being proposed as a full-time position. And it incorporates, and just want to confirm that to date, it does incorporate some of the duties of the marketing/community engagement position. And it still does, okay. And I know at that time, there was a lot of, there was a low response to the part-time position for the, so it was decided not to fill the marketing community engagement position at the time. And I know that in the minutes of F&P at February that Eric had mentioned, in order to fund a full-time paralegal position, I would not anticipate this being substantially a marketing position at this point in time. And I know we've talked a lot about that. And I went on record a number of times saying that I certainly understand that because, number one, because of the time that has elapsed that we didn't have a paralegal, there was a workload that had amassed, and it was totally in support of making sure that really needed that full attention, but still didn't want to lose the assistant position for communication. I know, Eric, you mentioned something about, I would not anticipate this being substantially a marketing position at this point in time. A lot of those duties would then fall on my shoulder or Amanda's shoulders regarding the actual creation of any materials that we might be able to do, where you two may be actually compiling it and then someone is just able just to press send. Is that still kind of the thought process?
I would love to.
Someone can
yes.
never find time. I know,
Think about it all the time. We'll put it that way.
Well, and that's why rather than me asking you before the meeting, I just wanted to just at least ask publicly so that we all hear the same information at the same time. Because I mean, I think that, whereas I agree with Alder not with some of his ideas about maybe a grander position, I have to agree with Alder Stevens in that we need a crawl before we start flying, because I just see through my time here at City Hall the importance of having greater communication with our constituents and with the general public. I'm still going to keep pushing for that, and I'll be in touch with both you and Amanda about some ideas of what to do, and maybe just some tiny ideas, whether we each, I don't know whether we're able to like each write some type of a column or what that possible newsletter can be, but I think the sooner we just start with some ideas, we can gain traction really quickly with hopefully minimal time. So thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. Alder Stevens?
Just to kind of build on that, I love the idea of a newsletter, but I don't love the idea of our city administrator and our city attorney writing the newsletter. I would think that they would it would set the tone, kind of oversee, these are the kind of things we want to talk about. And then whoever it is does it all up and, let Amanda do the attorney things to make sure it passes mustard and then hit send. So I'm given the impression that our executives in our organization are kind of busy, and I don't want to add a lot of work to their load if we don't have to, but I think that a newsletter has merit. So set the tone, but don't do the work, I guess, is how I'd like to see that.
Okay, so we have a lot of ideas. Eric?
It's just to sum up, I'm an advocate, a very strong advocate of community engagement to a large degree. We provide the service that the public pays for, and the public really should have a broader understanding of what it is we do for them. So that, when it comes time to tax time, you don't have to advertise what the benefits of the city of Onalaska are to as a place to live, work, and recreate. They already know they've been engaged on a frequent basis. It's not a marketing, it's not a sales job, it's just communication so that they feel confident in their elected officials, confident in the staff that works for them. So I'm a big advocate for that. That's why I comment to Alder Wolf's mention over here that yes, it's something I think about all the time. I think it's something that we do lack, and I do wish to find ways to improve.
Okay, Alder Wolf.
Thank you, Your Honor. And just a quick follow-up. That is one thing I missed. I agree with Alder Stevens. I think that someone should be developing the content. I think the city administrator needs to wave his magic wand, and also legal kind of put okay. But I do question whether you two should be developing and doing that work. I think I won't say the obvious, but I think that it should originate somewhere else, wherever that may be. But I'll certainly be talking to you about that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. Now, we already mentioned staffing in parks. We have another position. Normally within the budget process, the council has not had the opportunity necessarily to propose new positions at this point in time. That usually came, one-on-one to the administrator or to the department heads throughout the budget making process. So I thought it important that as these communications have been sent amongst the elected officials, that we have the opportunity to kind of discuss them and perhaps prioritize them. So this position here is the new records position in the police department, as requested by Chief Ashbeck, and I think he's best person to speak on that.
Chief Ashbeck.
Thank you, Eric. Yes. So first, I guess I would clarify that this position is not so much a new position, but take a part-time position and turn it into a full-time position. Currently, our open records clerk works approximately 2.25 hours, 5 days a week. And our current workload, which has been only increasing year after year, and just to give you an idea, we process approximately 800 open records requests a year. And there's many duties that go along with every request that comes in, and 2 hours a day is just not sustainable. And we continue to essentially fall behind, and it's difficult to keep up with the 10-day minimum to comply with these requests. So I'm asking that we really evaluate and see if we can add hours to this position.
And Chief, maybe you can add on the additional duties that have come up with the cameras.
Sure. So, I mean, we knew there would be some additional requests with cameras, but kind of what has gone along with this is the duties to redact certain items out of videos that contain sensitive information, items by law that need to be redacted, like driver's license information. And so that is a timely manner. And when we have to, or staff needs to watch and listen to a 2-hour video, a squad video, and then the same 2-hour body cam video, how do you accomplish that when you're only allowed 2 hours in that workday? So it's physically just impossible to get through all of the video and see what needs to be redacted and what's not. So, and like I said, the workload continues, the amount of requests continue to increase. As an example, just 5 years ago, we were processing less than 300 requests a year. And so over these 5 years, we've gone up exponentially to over 800 a year. And currently we're at about 300 for 2021. And like I said, I'm bringing it to your attention because this is just not sustainable at the pace that we're going.
Thank you, Chief. Amanda?
I just wanted to echo support for this position. I work quite directly with that position in answering questions and reviewing records and redaction. And the best way I can describe it is if you think of any police response, you've got dispatch going in the background, you've got officers on the phone, taking other calls. All of that information has to be reviewed for redaction purposes. So there's really not a second of footage that goes by that we don't have to have the record specialist review prior to releasing any record. And then adding in all the other considerations related to interpreting statutes and deciding what falls under what statute for redaction purposes. It really is more than, quite honestly, a full-time job.
Thank you, Amanda. Any other questions or comments? Alder Stevens?
Just a quick question for the chief. I'm curious, since we've rolled out the body cams, how much of the how much requests for information have been body cam related versus what the normal request would be?
Sure, I can tell you that we've had about 127 requests for body camera footage just this year so far. Quite a bit of that is the district attorney's office that is also requesting the entire case. But certainly we have had an increase coming from citizens, anyone interested in viewing that body cam footage. So certainly that has added some. I wouldn't say it was, doubled our work or anything, but there has been an increase in requests.
Like that's significant.
I'm sorry, go again?
It's been a significant increase is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think the difference is before with the squad video, the officer wore a wireless microphone. And so it was much easier to go through a squad video. And if you needed to redact audio, you could do that. But now you have a camera as well. And so there's things that are seen on that need to be redacted on top of the audio. So there's additional duties there.
And Chief, can you talk about the turnaround time for those requests coming from the district attorney's office? And how we're
Sure.
turning it around within 10 days, but having trouble meeting that?
Yes, thank you. So the practice has been, and Amanda could speak to this, whether it's by law, but the general rule of thumb is you need to respond to a requester within 10 days with the material, unless it is an exorbitant, exhaustive type request of many, many records. So, we oftentimes have to respond to a requester to say that, we're on their list and we'll get back to them as soon as possible. And sometimes it can be several weeks before we get to them. And it's just not how I like to operate. And I don't think it's a service to our public, a good service to our public. And I think we need to do better.
Thank you, Chief. Eric?
The way the state statute reads is that you must respond in a reasonable amount of time. That's generally taken to be 10 days. But keep in mind, the response does not necessarily have to mean the record. It can be you responding that you've received the record. And as Chief Ashbeck pointed out, you give a date that you expect to have things back that way. However, in the case of the body cams, keep in mind that there are new requests coming in within those 10 days. And so the point of 10 days really becomes irrelevant. It is you have to get them done before your next requests come in, or you're just continually building an exponentially growing backlog.
Okay, thank you everyone for your comments. Anything else? Okay, Eric?
Okay. Topic of, this may be an ARPA fund question or maybe a general fund question, but the topic of broadband service as a new initiative was brought forward. And don't know if anybody wants to discuss about it. So otherwise I will continue with this one. Generally broadband, one of the issues is if you do the expense of it using ARPA funds, what happens when those expenses run out in 2024? You really can't grow your general fund expenses, or potentially you could be looking at using those funds to establish a utility of some kind, which then the ratepayers pay for. You're not utilizing your general fund expenses past when the funds expire in 2024. So I think it's an interesting concept, one that the ARPA funds are allowed to be used for. It's just the big picture of how we utilize that and how we best provide that service to those that need that service in our community.
Alder Knott?
So how would this impact the EOC?
Jared, you want to talk?
If at all, I guess. I know that we have some communications concerns. I'm wondering if this.
Well, we do have fiber coming in shortly to the facility, and I'll let Jared speak to the broadband program, unrelated to this.
So the city project that we currently have, we're going to be connecting all the city buildings with fiber cables. So we can get our own connection between the buildings. We're not renting any fiber cables from Charter or CenturyLink, Lumen now, that we had in the past. So with that, we'll also be piping in, which we're still connected at the street, to our own internet for this building. So it's kind of two different things with that. But part of the broadband initiative that's in the ARPA funding that you see, I think part of it is more of a rural character broadband initiative. We've already got 2 utility providers in this community that provide high-speed internet service that is pretty readily available within the community. And I don't think we could start up a system, even with the ARPA funding, and probably be competitive on that to try and provide service to all individuals. Now, I haven't went in depth into that and done a lot of research on it, but that's my first instinct of knowing our community.
Thank you, Jared. Any other questions or comments on that? Alder Wolf?
Thank you, Your Honor. I know several years ago when I was serving on technology, a previous city administration had promised that we were going to be looking into broadband and providing it for all citizens in Onalaska, maybe making it a utility, at least having that honest discussion. never occurred, which very much disappointed me and other technology committee members. I know that there's been various grants. I know City of La Crosse, they've talked about possibly broadband and possibly working with their neighbors. So I don't know all the ins and outs and the pluses and minuses, but I would like us to at least be open to the concept of it. I think it's nice to have all our cards on the table and not take any cards off the table. But I think but if anyone comes calling and they want to work together, I think we should be willing to at least have a honest sit-down discussion and see what we can do. But whether it's feasible for us, we haven't had that conversation yet. So but I would only be willing to support if it makes sense for the city of Onalaska and for our citizens. But it's very intriguing, and I don't know whether or not, this was like maybe 10 years ago when we were talking seriously about it. So I honestly don't know how much has changed. I was really brought up to snuff on the subject 10 years ago, but I don't know what's happened in the last decade. So I don't know if all the grant money has dried up, I don't know. So, but it was very intriguing a decade ago. And there were a number of cities in the state of Wisconsin that had it at that time. So, thank you.
Thank you. Alder Stevens?
To build on Alder Wolf, I would appreciate maybe not an exhaustive report, but something that would kind of spell out what the pros and cons are, what the potential costs, if there's any interest from neighboring communities, just a general feasibility review that could be presented to council. Maybe this could be something we could set up as a utility and utilize the grant funds. Maybe that money would be better spent elsewhere, but more information would be appreciated.
Okay, anyone else? All right, back to you, Eric.
All right, this doesn't generally, well, to some degree, I guess. So the question about review of Omni Center ownership was brought up again, just based on obviously how the performance was in pandemic year of 2020. Obviously moving forward in 2021, doing better. There's a long history of the Omni Center in the city, and it has had various models of ownership and management where we are. And that topic has come up again, is to review that. I will take that as sort of, Dan, as the same conversation about broadband service, kind of have a report as to what the options are, perhaps, unless the council is looking at in budget year 2022 to make a change. And I leave that to the council to tell me if that's what the desire is.
Any comments or questions from the councilors? Alder Stevens?
Well, this is something we could probably pick up again on item 4D. I think the two are kind of tied.
Okay.
Yep. All right, expenditure restraint cap discussion was another item that was presented for a new initiative. A bit of history in 2019, as part of the 2020 budget, proposal was made to the council and the council approved for the hiring of 3 firefighters and 3 police officers, which was doable because of exceeding our expenditure restraint cap, which meant in 2021, in this year, we would not receive the expenditure restraint payments that was the state gives to us as a benefits or a bonus for hitting our expenditure restraints. So in 2019, then the levy went to the revenue side. The levy side went to the full levy amounts to fund those positions. We were not previously to that charging the full levy amounts because the expenditure restraint cap kept us from spending the amount that we would levy. So why levy that amount? So current status is the expenditure restraint cap. We should be hitting in this particular year, and we should be able to get that payment in 2022 again. But the overall question then is the levy limits, that if we exceed the expenditure restraint cap for expenses, we may not be able to levy for those costs. So that's sort of my history and introduction to expenditure restraint cap discussion.
Alder Stevens?
Thank you, Your Honor. I had put this on here, and I'm not passionately in favor of using the restraint cap, but I think it is a tool that we should discuss. And over the last 2-year cycle, I think we were able to, I think we decreased the mill rate by 7% while we were able to add those 3 public, the 3 and 3 public safety positions because of how we use that tool. So the reason I wanted to put that on there is knowing that we have some staffing holes in other departments, and this potentially could be a tool to address that. It sets us up for a difficult year in the following budget year. But the danger is if we have spending constraints and then we create new positions, we may have difficulty funding those new positions in the future, and then we would have to cut those, which is very uncomfortable. It's bad for the city. It's really bad for the families that are affected. So this is something I would actually call it the Sun Prairie model, because I think that they follow if I recall, they alternate years where they exceed the cap to keep up with the growth. And they're a community that has a lot of growth in terms of population. We do have down the chute, there is some substantial new tax base that should be coming into the city that I think we would be better positioned to utilize that if we are smart about how we set the budget up now. So if we want to fund some of these positions, this might be a tool that we consider. I don't know if it's the right answer until essentially we let the Erics and the Fred do their thing, but I'd be interested in looking at that.
Okay, thank you. Any other counselors? Back to you, Eric.
Item G, Housing First, End Homelessness in La Crosse County by 2025. I referenced an email sent May 4th actually came from Steve O'Malley, I believe, but regarding not a referendum, a petition signed by 650 local people regarding the use of ARPA funds to help end homelessness, to fund strategies that make homelessness in a community brief, rare, and non-repeating.
Alder Nat?
So I actually have, I have several comments I'd like to make on this. I do want to start with first by saying that I do not question the intent behind this admirable goal. All right. That said, I'm going to be a fly in the ointment a little bit as I go through what I read here. But again, that my intent here is not to be questioning motives of people, of anyone who is, looking at this right now or is drafting it. Very first thing I want to point out, I did do a fair amount of research on the Housing First initiative. It's been around for quite a while now, and there's quite a bit of data on it. And the Housing First outcomes, again, Housing First is the program they want to use here. The Housing First outcomes from multiple studies, both private and government studies, show no improvement or even a higher, and that is correct, or even a higher rate of substance abuse, mental illness, and death than non-intervention control groups, meaning groups they looked at where nothing was done. So as far as destructive behaviors, there are indicators that Housing First really has no impact on destructive behaviors or potentially could even be making them worse. Now, why is that? Is because Housing First, and they actually indicate that in here, but it's true, is not a transitional program. It does not require participation in any kind of services. It does not require reduced substance abuse, or even require that people take their prescribed medications. The only metric that the Housing First shows that will use to show that they're successful is that it puts roofs over people's heads. But we're creating a community where if we take a look under the petition, directly under, it starts with the paragraph 2 under the original petition, it says that it's unconditional. It's not something that should be withheld for socially unaccepted behavior. It does not, and then you go on to the next paragraph, it does not require sobriety. So what we're doing here is we're creating a community that, although they're indoors, their behavior can become even more destructive and their mortality rate can even be higher than what it would be if we did nothing, which I think is counterproductive. Also, if we take a look at the very first sentence of the petition where it says we believe that housing is a fundamental human right, that's a leap that I personally have a great deal of difficulty accepting. That's the ultimate in welfare state and arguably is even socialist. And I have personally a very big difficulty on that, considering that my oath is to our Constitution. So, I mean, this is really a big step. I understand a lot of money can flow down from the federal government for it, but the results that it produces just aren't there. And we've known this data for well over a decade now, that it just doesn't do that. Now, if we create a condition to where we're going to have housing units where people are not required to be sober from drugs or alcohol, they're not required to take their medication, the lawlessness is not a condition for them for staying there. What we've just done is, I would argue that we've created an enclave that is going to create a law enforcement nightmare for our police, because we are tacitly approving unlawful behavior by ignoring it in the housing areas. And it's also going to create an additional danger to the local community. So it's the housing first that I have an issue with. Government solutions to housing have really failed quite huge over nearly a century now. I'd like to see us looking at either private or a public-private partnership on how to address this, because private and not-for-profit housing or homeless programs at least seem to me, from what I've done with my search, to have slightly better results. So I guess I'll leave it at that for discussion at this point. So.
Thank you, Alder Knott. Any other counselors want to add anything to that? Alder Stevens?
Kind of a different point from Steve's, not counter to his point, but I think the ARC funds that we have is between 1.7, 1.8 million. City of La Crosse, I believe, had 33 times that amount. I'm thinking that money is, I would be very hesitant to send our funds out of the city of Onalaska. I'd be much more in favor of keeping that here and investing in infrastructure.
Thank you.
Further to that point, to what Steve had said, I'm not sure that it's the government's role to fund that. This seems like it's there's charitable causes, and I'm active in a lot of those that should be involved in trying to help people that way rather than using our infrastructure money.
Thank you, Alder Stevens. Alder Knott?
Right, and I guess to also chime in and I guess bandwagon in on what Alderman Stevens's point is 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the 5th paragraph of the petition where it talks about the full cost of implementing a housing first policy should not fall on any one municipality alone. I kind of am reading in between the lines here, rightfully or wrongfully. I guess it's up for each of us to decide, but this definitely could ultimately lead to a loss of a certain amount of budget autonomy if we're going to make an agreement to where we're going to be sending our funds to another municipality for this program, which again, everything I've shown Housing First is not a successful program. Again, I think, you know, obviously addressing homelessness is an admirable thing to do. The question is, how do we do it to where we get results? And I mean, even the goal in this is that to eliminate all homelessness by 2025. And I'll tell you, that is a goal that is not attainable just by, we know from studies that there is a significant number, it's a minority, but it is not a small minority, a significant number of homeless population that choose that lifestyle. They don't want to have some of these services. We know this from studies. So it just, even their goal, it's just not attainable.
Thank you, Alder Knott. Alder Smith?
Yeah, I'd like to agree with what Dan said as number one. I think I would hate to see the money go outside the city. I mean, I think we need to find a way to be productive with it. But I also agree that, this probably isn't a good for the government to be involved in this. So I understand what you're saying too, Steve, that the past success has been pretty minimal on this. So I would support using those funds within the city in the way that we can, but not doing anything beyond that with the government. So that's my thought.
Thank you. All right, back to you, Eric.
All right. Item H is implement citywide online newsletter. I think we've discussed it a little bit earlier this evening around community engagement position, either enhanced or otherwise, and a conversation about staffing, seeing the value of putting a newsletter together, just find the staffing to do so and the funds to do so. Unless someone wants to just add something else, we can move on.
I think we've covered that one.
Okay. Item I, increase hours for fire department administrative assistants, and that would be Chief Goody.
Chief, you want to come up?
Thank you. We had justified this position in 2019 after having Stacy on staff for about 5 or 6 years. She's over 8 years now. And this position was reduced to a 20-hour work week. Our department is continuing to grow. I know we do have our assistant chief that'll be coming on board, but I can imagine I'll be spending a lot of time with him as well, mentoring him into his new role as our fire department is growing. She does so many duties. We usually, in the morning we meet, we talk about things we need to accomplish. A lot of it is invoicing, any record requests, payroll. It's just kind of a task that I feel like we're falling behind on. The 20 hours a week just doesn't seem to be working out very well. My hope is that we could increase her hours to full-time if possible, so that we can establish some type of a normal workday workload schedule for her. Our phones are ringing all day. Our customers need service. We've justified and talked about she's the face of the fire department. As people come up or as people call, she's handling, screening the calls, wherever that needs to go. So some of we talked about the EOC, some of you mentioned a little bit. That's a priority for the fire chief as I was hired. I feel like that's kind of hasn't received the attention because of all the other duties and responsibilities. We had a tabletop drill today on a chlorine spill, and I felt kind of bad for Stacy because she wasn't quite prepared for that with the manuals and things like that we need. Just going through, I did have a memo that I did put together. Scheduling, as COVID is finishing up, we have about 2,000 children that we do programs for. She screens all those calls, schedules all those. Coming up for our firefighter interviews, she's done a lot of work on that and scheduling that. In addition, one of my goals as fire chief was to create a permit for services. We spend a lot of time in these new properties, these new businesses that are being approved through the city as our city continues to grow. And we have to make sure the systems are put in, installed right, tested. So we created, as you probably all know, a fee structure. So that income is also new to us in 2021 and is coming in on a regular basis. I know, Carrie, you talked about the 8+ years of service, or you talked about retention in people's years of service. She's learned a lot. She's a really valuable asset to the City of Onalaska Fire Department. Imagine working with somebody for 8+ years and learning the dynamics of working with firefighters and the public, and it's really a special skill. She also has a background in financing through working at M&I Bank for many years. So I could probably talk on and on about justifying Stacy and what she does in increasing her hours, but I guess more importantly, if you guys had any questions for me.
there any questions or comments? I think one thing that I would have you emphasize a little bit, Chief, is that the fire inspection permits and fees rolled out this year, which was the same year that her hours were cut. So an increase of duties in the same year that a decrease in hours.
Right, and we've issued several so far, and again, and I'm sure Katie could speak to that, there's a lot of projects that are coming up. I've been in the planning commission meetings. We have apartment complexes, all those permits are gonna be coming out. I know we're well over 8,000 or 9,000 so far this year on permit fees that we've issued. That's revenue that's coming into the city that was never there before. Believe it or not, burning permits are probably over about 400 for the 2-year cycle that they roll through, and that's $40 every permit that somebody takes out. So we're accomplishing a lot. My goal, obviously, once the assistant chief gets on board, is to even push harder. As if Stacy were here, she'd say I do push pretty hard, but I have a lot of goals through the years that I've built up, and I want to see us be the best combination department in the county or the state. And that's really my drive. So things like generating permit fees and also the demands that the assistant chief, he's going to have things that Stacy would need to help him with. So again, that's just what I'm hoping for.
Thank you. Any questions for the chief? No comments? Okay, thank you. Back to you.
Thanks.
Is there anything else the council would like to add under 2 for new initiatives or staffing requests? Okay.
Would you like to take a brief pause and have a walk around for a minute, or you want to power through? Okay, let's just take just a little walk around, 5 minutes or less. We'll take a pause.
I would ask for a formal recess for the minutes, 5 minutes.
No, we weren't supposed to take a recess. I thought if we were doing that, we weren't supposed to take a recess. That's why I was doing it that way.
You can always recess. You can,
Okay, we'll recess.
for the record, then it shows a recess for 5 minutes. No business is being transacted then when you're.
We will be in a recess. The time is 7:25.
Get rid of those cookies. Yeah.
It's a cookie recess.
Eat those cookies.
Call it what it is, Mayor.
So much better than recess.
You have water?
Eat those cookies because I don't want to take any home.
I want to. Got a pot of coffee going, I'd definitely go for that.
Much better than the last one. It was a little different. What I'm saying is we were happier with this batch than we were with one prior. So I'm just. Well, we at least kind of tweak our methodology. It's well, how you can control the heat ratio with the goal. I thought it was really good. Well, we're not gonna do it again until Chief's Challenge. Chief's Challenge, you got October. Okay. Then you gotta decide which chief you like better.
Is he?
It'll be successful. I hope so.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah, I needed all of a sudden my head just started pounding. I'm like, I need something. That's why I went to Gerald. I was like, how do I get water? I'm trying to pull the plastic off I'm like destroyed the drinking fountains, and I realized this isn't working. Then what, Jared, I need to take some medicine. He went upstairs, had to get me a cup of water, and I want our drinking fountains back.
Arizona.
And stay there, so whatever you're doing.
Oh my, I gotta fix the light. Union is always to the left.
Okay,
I just think it turned over time.
probably.
Stephen, where did your daughter graduate from?
Oh, I'm sitting, this is my old spot. I'm sitting in. No, it's not. That's where I was for the last year. Graduated from business.
This is worse than watching paint dry. That's neat. He's a cutie. He said, sorry, we're not going to be able to Where did we stop here? Okay. I think so. Yeah. What day is it?
He's gonna be one of these top dogs.
So Wednesday, right?
Yeah, by the way, Ken, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to my event.
I mean, he just,
Okay.
when you only see like once or twice.
30.
It just looks a little, I don't know why, but so we're all getting older, you know, and when someone has a cap on, I lose it. I can't.
All right.
I know they went out because I saw Chilson yesterday and he said Bielecki asked him about. So I don't know that Joe actually read the letter, so I told him about it, but now he knows what Jim Bielecki was. I told him he should, I told him it was a diploma. You should show up and get your diploma.
Other paper.
White gold.
Uh-huh.
45 roll.
And Joanne had asked me and I said, oh yeah, I mean, I thought it was warm in here when I got here.
You could do like funny gifts too, like, here's celery,
Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's a little ranch on
a
the
used boot.
Okay, let's get going here. You can get everybody called back to order. The time is now 7:37. And we were on item 3. We'll go back to our city administrator to lead our discussion.
Thank you. Item number 3, list any currently budgeted items or staff you would like to see eliminated in 2022 and the approximate savings. Only 2 items here. First is a discussion that since police and fire staffing had increased beginning in 2020 budget to 2021, that in 2022, we'd like to see the overtime for those departments reduced in a comparable amount. I think it's pretty straightforward.
Comments or questions on that one?
I think the idea was by hiring more people, we would be less reliant on overtime to fill in those shortages. So hopefully the budget can go down for overtime while we're staffing with more people.
Okay, thank you.
Item B under 3 is not necessarily a new reduction, but it confirms the reduction already made in 2021, which is keep the reduction in crossing guard program for 2022. All right. Is there any other additional items you would like to see reduced or eliminated in 2022? All right, we can move on. Number 4. List any general goal statement you would like the council to use to direct the preparation of the administrator's budgets. And we've discussed this a little bit already, but the staff retention by having employees move towards appropriate levels on the compensation plan and ensuring competitive wages. Be a goal. B would be prepare for a regional Cooley Metropolitan Sewage District if we cannot reach an agreement with La Crosse. No surprise there. They did have the groundbreaking today. Kim, good job throwing the dirt.
I got the dirt shoveled.
Rainy day today. We are currently paying for the addition at this point in time and have paid overtime, so probably appropriate that we were there to observe that.
They thanked us multiple times.
It also referenced long drawn out meetings, which none of us partners recall
Lots of,
having.
giving them lots of input.
Moving on. C,
Is that us?
review park usage and reduce the number if some are underutilized. Reallocate the funds to parks with greater usage. I think it references, I think there's one in Oak Park that's being looked at underutilized. Keeping in mind, I think some of those parks, as we look at, there may have been restrictions or funds given to us that we have to use, but we'll leave to this council to discuss the park usage in a number of parks.
Alder Stevens and then Alder Knott.
I had put this on here, and this is kind of a an in conjunction with what we spoke about on the flip side page, there's a concern in the Parks Department with seasonal employees versus full-time employees and what their workload is. And over the past few years, we've actually added parks. And my time on the Parks Council, it seemed like there was a general support to emphasize the parks that people use. There are parks that are rarely used. And one method that we could approach the deficiency in labor is to whether sell off and whether it's developed and added to the tax roll, but de-emphasize the parks that are not being used by a lot of people. People go to Great River Landing, people go to Roe Park. We learned recently that a lot of people go to Sandalwood Park. But we have seen parks, and for a while we would kind of go around every day and look at a few and keep track of who was going where. And it could be just a timing issue, but there are some parks that hardly anybody uses. It'd be great if everybody had a park down their street, in their own backyard. But we have limited resources, and I think that we should take care of the stuff that we have that people are using. That should be where our priority is. So if we don't add more staff to take care of our parks, one solution would be to reduce the number of parks that we have. And I know that there's covenants that we have to take care of, but they're expensive to maintain. It's mind-boggling how much it would cost to replace the park equipment. I mean, it's over 100,000. And I think we have a lot of these parks that are coming down the chute where we're going to have to address that soon. So there could be some cost savings here and make it easier for our staff to maintain the amenities that we have.
Thank you. Alder Knott was next.
Yeah, so during my time on the Parks Board, I had the same impression as well, that certainly there are parks being utilized to a greater degree than others, and that there are some park lands, I guess I'm going to be very specific in my language here, that although Parks and Rec has to maintain and administer them, really don't even have any services that they provide at all, other than the fact that the land is there. So I do think there are some potential cost savings to be done by looking at this.
Okay, we'll go to Alder Wolf and then Alder Smith.
Thank you, Your Honor. I know last year or so, it finally went through Parks. Subito went through council, and I know the courts got shut down and then there was no forward movement, but I know it was approved to, I believe, to go in negotiations with Oak Park 5. Could Amanda give us an update as far as where that is?
Yeah, so that is on my radar to start working on here in the next month to get that wrapped up this year, the sale of Oak Park number 5. And just to talk about that briefly, I guess if this is something that is a strong budget consideration, I'd really like to have these discussions now because there's a lot of legal considerations. We cannot actually just sell parks at whim. We have to look at how we receive the park land, whether it was platted and dedicated as park land, whether DNR funds were utilized for the park land. And there's kind of a lot of hoops that we have to jump for. For example, Oak Park number 5, we have to go to the courts, we have to have notice, we have to petition to be able to even sell that park. And that was kind of a fluke in that that was annexed in from the township, and so therefore they had excessive park land, and so we happen to have excessive park land. We also have requirements for how much park land we have to have as well, and so there's a lot of factors that kind of come into play when we're talking about parkland. And so if there are specific parks that you guys would like us to evaluate, it would be good to know which specific parks so we can kind of dig into the history of how the city acquired them and what restrictions we may or may not have as far as the ability to even sell them.
Thank you, Amanda. Alder Knott?
I think ultimately there's also a cautionary note on this. I mean, it looks, my understanding, having been again on the board for a couple of years actually in the past, is that the way we acquired some of these lands is what I mentioned, where it's just property with no service on it, and it's not really conducive to service on it. Yet the Parks and Rec has to maintain and administer these properties, is that we accepted them from developers where they offered us this property sometime in the past, and we took it because it was quote unquote free. Well, they're only offering it because it's not developable and they didn't want to maintain it. So we have to be really careful in the future about exacerbating this problem too. And I know this goes back a long time that this has been occurring. So, yeah.
Right. I think I just want to take a moment to counter what Alder Knott said. That isn't exactly my memory of how it happened. What the situation was is back 30 years ago now, when the developments were happening, the developers were required to donate land to the city, and they would use their least valuable land that was undevelopable to fulfill that requirement. And the city fathers at that time did not demand a higher standard as we do now. And so I just want us to be very careful. In the case of Oak Park 5, the neighborhood, I think, is in support of that situation, and I'm not fundamentally against that. But this line of thinking, I think, is very dangerous, because I think that parks are something that people value in our community. I value it in our community. And to just make a blanket statement that we're going to start selling off parkland is very dangerous. I think if there was isolated situations where maybe we could consider that, that's one thing. But as a general policy, I'm going to oppose it. Alder Stevens?
I guess two things. So first, to Amanda's point, it would be nice if council could get maybe, if there could be some sort of audit presented where we can see which parks are, there's legal impediments to, and which ones they're not. And then the second point is we're not looking to wholesale get rid of parks. We just kind of want to see what our status is, and then kind of weigh how much particular parks are being used and see if there's an opportunity there. Maybe there's not, but let's kind of find out where we stand.
Thank you. Alder Burmaster?
But I think what I'm hearing from Amanda is there's a lot of research to do on these parks. And so I don't think that list would be easily available to us. Is that correct, Amanda? Because she would actually have to research every park then. It's not as easy as just saying, oh, these parks would be okay to get rid of and these ones aren't. I think we would have to identify specific parks for her to be able to dig through the paperwork to find that answer.
It also will likely cost some money. For example, I can tell you right now, I don't know if you remember, but we have the Broham development, and we're in the process of trying to swap parkland for some of their land, and that has become quite the process. We have to get DNR approval. DNR has to decide, because stewardship funds were used, whether or not we can even do that. We had to do a title search and obtain all the past documents to even kind of go through the history of whether the DNR stewardship funds applied. And so it would be a fairly time-consuming project. We can do that, you know, for every park, or if you can narrow it down to certain parks, that would probably be helpful. But that, I mean, there would be both some cost to the city to look into that and to do the audit, and definitely some time.
Danwick, is this something you'd like to comment on?
I just would concur with what Attorney Amanda Jackson and Alderperson Carrie Burmaster is saying. This is, you know, if there's certain areas you want to look at, I know Park Avenue Park was an area that was looked at and was under a microscope, but the neighbors came out in Groves at that time and said they want their park, they want to keep their park. You know, if there's certain areas that want to be identified, we can look at it, but it is very time consuming. You know, I talk to the neighbors in the Oak Park area probably at least once a month with a neighbor asking what's the status of it. You know, they're interested. This would be a large undertaking for us to try to research and find out what can and can't be done.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the council? Okay, Eric?
Item D, discussion on the long-term viability of Omni Center and how to fund it during shortage years. It also speaks to sort of the long-term view of how to operate the Omni Center beyond just shortage of years. I guess the question I would pose is that something that this council would like to look at for capital improvements, perhaps a study, hiring a consultant or an expert in management, or are you looking for, staff reports? I guess some more clarity as to kind of what we're looking at here for the Omni Center.
Alder Knott?
So as far as viability, I think that the Omni Center is running its budget close enough to at least budget neutral. I mean, there are years that they lose, some perhaps tens of thousands of dollars, and then there are other years that that I've seen where they pretty much break even or even make a little bit. But that is not the full story. My concern is that number one, it provides a huge service to the entire region, let alone just our city. And the amount of hotel sales in this area are certainly enhanced significantly from Omni Center events. I know I just out of pure happenstance was talking to Dan this week, talking about Omni Center, and he mentioned a bags tournament that had just occurred, and the number of people that came in, with a great number of them coming from outside of the area, meaning that all of those people would have been staying in the hotel. So, hotel tax revenue, everything, that's kind of like this hidden revenue that we look at separately from the Omni Center, but the Omni Center absolutely influences that. I just want to make sure we all totally understand that when we look at viability.
Okay, Alder Olson and then Alder Stevens.
Just to add a couple of comments to Mr. Knott's comments, I spent some time out there myself over the last couple of years, and the value to families in this community is unbelievable. With hockey and all the other things, you see the strength of families in this community, and how that backs up the families, and seeing all the families together spending the better part of weekends together. And that says a lot about our community and the strength of our community and their families. So thanks, Steve.
Alder Stevens?
So want to have a counterpoint for Steve. While the Omni Center generally sometimes is a wash and breaks even, that's operational. It does not take into account the capital improvements cost. So there is a substantial cost to the city. For example, if we have a chiller goes out, that's $500,000, and we don't have the revenue to do that. I don't disagree that the Omni Center has a lot of value, and we have a strong hockey and ice skating culture that kind of makes Onalaska unique, and there's a lot of value in that. We have been fortunate that we have a fund that pads us through the tough years, and I know this last year that we've had to dip into that. We are eventually going to run out of that, and the foibles that our counterparts to the south and La Crosse have with the La Crosse Center, I mean, they really took it in the shorts during a pandemic year and a down year, and that shortage fell to the taxpayers, and we've been inoculated against that. So I'm not actually looking to get rid of the Omni Center. I'm looking to protect the Omni Center in the long term, and we're going to have to find a way to invest some money into making that happen. We have to build up that fund. We looked at advertising, and I don't know if that went anywhere or not. I'd really hate to raise the room tax to provide more funding to that, but we can't run out of that money. We lose money every year on the Omni Center. We can have the discussion if this is a value to our city. I think that it is, but we can't stick our head in the sand. We have to have a long-term plan to keep this viable if this is important to us. I am open to ideas, but if we wait till the 10 years or so when we run out of money, we're going to have a problem, and it's going to be a very different discussion. It's going to be a harder discussion.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, Eric?
Item E, increased borrowing for capital projects during years when rates are low. You'd like to speak on that? Interest rates are low right now. The one thing to keep in mind is, as Fred had calculated, We've had some major projects, in particular, the fire truck was one that we exceeded our usual borrowing amount as a one-time basis. Moody's was okay with that. It protected our rating, not a big deal, but we still have to pay that back. And Fred, you had a statistic of where we stand right now with the increase from the debt servicing fund?
Next year, 170,000.
That's an increase from the previous year. So right now for the budget, we'll be looking at the first $170-some thousand in new revenue will go to the debt servicing of the debt that we've already issued.
Okay, Alder Stevens and then Alder Knott.
So this was something I had put on there, and I think it's a good strategy, but there's danger with it. I am in favor of borrowing where the cost of funds is as close to zero as it's going to get, but we should use that money to get ahead on projects on our infrastructure. So most of it I would see go to roads, public works. I'm sure we have a list that we put out, there are projects that get pushed off year after year, and eventually they rise closer to the top as situations become more dire. I'm suggesting that we borrow while it's cheap to take care of this, and then when the cost of funds go up, this is the dangerous part, then we have to have restraint. We got to cut back because the temptation is, well, we spent $9.5 million last year, so we'll do it this year again, and we'll find a use for that money. We have to maximize the benefit of the low interest rate. We have to cut back when things go north later. So it's hard to do, and I don't know what council will look like when rates go up, but I think it's a good strategy if we have the discipline to adhere to it.
Thank you. Let's go to Alder Knott then.
Well, Dan just touched on the point I was going to make just now, actually. So in general, I actually support that. It makes sense. So long as we have a borrowing cap, that makes sense as well. If we go too much in debt, then we go into the death spiral that we've seen a lot of municipalities go into. But the main concern I would have would be future years with future elected officials that we have no control over, that when the rates are higher, they ignore the fact that we had borrowed more when rates are low. They still want what they want now, and they now borrow when it's higher. So there is definitely risk to this, but I think in general, it does make sense to me. So.
Alder Wolf?
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, I agree with both previous alders' points of view. The one thing that I think we probably are all going to be in agreement is that we certainly don't want to risk our Moody's rating. And at the end of the day, that's what I'm going to be looking at administration and the finance director to be working with our financial people as far as what number we can borrow for capital improvements. I was fully in support of going over this past year. I thought it was a smart thing to do. I don't like to spend my own money. I hate to spend other people's money even more so, but I thought it was the right thing to do. And I would certainly entertain that going forward into next year if the rates continue to stay very low, if we can get ahead on some of the infrastructure projects, especially some roads and paving for those PASER scores that might be like in the 2s and such. So, but I'm certainly open to seeing what happens and transpires with capital improvements this year. But I would certainly be in support as long as we can maintain our AA2, I believe it is.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Alder Smith?
Yeah, I agree with Diane and everybody here. I think now is the time when the interest rates are low to do what we can to get the big bang for our buck. What the Moody rating is the key, though, that, we have to have a cap of where we can go, what we can do, knowing what Dan's saying is that it isn't going to be every year, but when we can do all we can and to get the most that we can, at least off of our list, the best we can, and use that money wisely. So
Right.
I think everybody supports it pretty much.
Maybe, Eric, this would be a good place for you to give your speech about what items are appropriate for the capital improvement budget.
Sure, off the cuff. Thank you. Within the capital improvement budget, there's really two sources of funds. One is the state trust fund borrowing, which we utilize for items that do not have a long depreciation value. Other than that, then we go to the open market, issue debt, get a bond rating, and that's for items that would have a lifespan of 20 years because we're paying back in 20 years. So you don't want to necessarily borrow at the low rates for items that you are replacing before you actually had them paid off. So a good chunk of what those rates are lower, but they're not nearly as lower as the debt. Fred, do you remember what the state trust funds are right now? They're 3 probably, right? Yeah, so, they're still substantially higher than what you can borrow and issue debt at because they have very, very few restrictions of what you can spend it on. So you can spend it on, items. We do 5-year borrowing with that. So items that have 5-year borrowings on it. The problem is, and why we're caught right now this year with the debt servicing is as items that have that 5-year lifespan they're borrowing for take up larger and larger portion of that, say 3.5 million that we usually borrow. That means that we're paying those off more rapidly in the first 5 years than what we're borrowing for longer term. And so that's driving our annual debt servicing payment up higher each year than really a steady growth would be. And that's, again, just been past practice over the last several years, last 5 years plus, where we have the 5-year borrowing is catching up to us. So the more of the higher dollar values that you're buying, the assets that last for 20 plus years, streets, the big one, any assets that you can depreciate over 20 years, that helps us. But borrowing a lot for the 5 years will harm us at this point. It's still expensive, not as cheap as debt in the open market, and will drive up. I mean that first 170,000, that's the growth. That's not our debt servicing. That's the growth over last year. So the first 175,000 of new revenues that we have coming in will go just to offset that this year already, in 2022 already. So I don't know if that answers your question that way, but
No, that's what I was getting.
generally what we're looking at, if we're looking at bullying that, I would recommend the items that have, a long depreciated value, assets.
Any other questions or comments?
All right, Fred?
Okay.
All right, answer. Was that okay?
Let the record show that Fred approved.
Fred gave us a thumbs up. Yeah, and just the only, that was the main thing I was going to say is that when we're looking at the capital improvement projects, although we're all guilty of it, it's better to look at the longer term projects rather than to get the short term projects on there, even though we use it sometimes as a function to budget things that we can't fit into that equipment replacement fund or some of the other funding sources we have.
For example, we have a very good vehicle purchase program, particularly say like the police department. We have, up-to-date vehicles as often as we can, but those we can't borrow for 20 years. So, I mean, those items automatically we purchase on a regular basis to support our departments. But that's always 5 years. So it's always taking a portion of that 5-year debt that we're looking at for vehicles, for example. They don't depreciate over 20.
Okay,
And
Fred.
you're going to give me a 20-year loan in a car.
Fred's going to give us his 2 cents.
I just wanted to elaborate on what Eric had stated. In 2020, we borrowed 542,000 for state trust fund loan. Principal and interest payment next year, 2022, 115,396. 2021, 3.5 million bond issue. Principal and interest payment for next year, 107,000.
Again, paying over 20, but that's how we're finding ourselves sort of with that growing debt servicing because it's the short-term borrowing.
It's a lot of money.
On that happy note, should we move on?
Okay, go ahead, Eric. I think we're ready to.
All right, item F, implement tools to measure and monitor ongoing employee morale.
Anyone?
Discuss.
Aldernott?
Just very briefly, I think it's a good idea, but there are survey tools that are low cost or even no cost already available online that I think are relatively easy to implement.
Hey, Alder Smith?
Yeah, and I agree because I put this on there on this one because it was on there. We talked about it in the past, and I just think it's real important coming from my environment. Always getting that feedback, And not just one time, you know, okay, here's, you know, it's actually, are we improving? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Finding tools that can measure that and be more proactive than reactive. A lot of times we get these surveys and we see all these things in there that we need to fix, but it's, you know, like an annual thing. If there are tools, and there are a lot of tools out there that are online, cheap, you know, you can use your own, you can, a lot of different things. But I think it'd just be good, especially with some of the challenges we've had with turnover, new employees, lots of different things going on. You know, some of our layoffs, I think the morale, we got to work on the morale of the team. And so anything we can do to monitor employee morale and to make sure we're going in the right direction, I think will be a benefit to the city. So that's my thought. Now, how we do that, I guess, administration to decide, you know, with our HR people and our human resources, but I think it's important.
Thank you. Any other comments on that one? Oh, Aldernaut?
Yeah, this is also something that is it's not a one-time. So if the city does do a survey, for instance, in 2022 on, you know, the climate, if you will, of the city, the caution is be careful how we react to that, because that's the initial information. It actually takes a certain number of years to determine baseline and what trends may be and what have you, if you understand where I'm going. So, you know, a one-off doesn't necessarily require an immediate massive action. We really got to compare it year to year to determine where we truly are.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Alder Wolf?
Thank you, Your Honor. I think the only one thing that I would add with that, if a survey were to be done, I think the biggest, in my opinion, the biggest driving force are the questions that are asked and how they are framed. That's all I have. Thank you.
Let's wrap it up then with item G.
Okay, last on the list at this time, develop strategies to improve internal communication and accountability between staff, departments, and administration. It's something that we'll strive for and we'll continue to strive for. But as for a budget item, I will let the alders discuss.
Okay. Any comments from the alders on this topic? No? Okay.
And
Eric?
finally, I will thank you for your input for the budget. It's good, some food for thought as we move forward in preparing that budget. If obviously not everyone can be funded through our levy limits and expenditure restraint caps that we are dealt with, but the input you receive here is hopefully something that you will see back to you when the budget is prepared.
Thank you, Eric. Would anybody like to say anything else on the budget before we move on to the next item?
Your Honor.
Sure, Alder Stevens.
Just a kind of note, going through the process, we had, I really look at setting policy and setting budget as really a core function of the role of council. And so just kind of walking back a little bit, I believe it was April 22nd was a meeting, I think, or I think when we were issued the request from the city administrator to have the input on the budget with a due date of May 4th. So I was a little vexed that half of the council did not submit that by that time. And then this was discussed a week ago and we still had issues coming in today. So the purpose for that time delay was not, in my view, I don't think the city administrator was just arbitrarily setting a deadline. It was so that they could research this, so that we could think about this and they could confer with staff. So that extra time makes it so everybody can do their job and we get a better end product. And I've noticed it was kind of a trend when we had, there was the city administrator review, there was a lot of people that just chose not to do that. And I take the role in city council very seriously. I think it's an honor to serve the people, and these are core functions that we should be doing. So I would say that when something is requested from the city administrator, that's a core cause that we should be doing, I think as a whole, we need to be doing better. I mean, you're representing your constituents. We have colleagues here on the council that we have to deal with this. And when we have late entries coming in, I think that staff kind of, through the process, if it was done right, they'd be able to prep and talk to us and talk to each other and present. And we got them running around in circles. And I think it's disrespectful to the city administrator and our colleagues. So I'm just asking, I'm not calling out anybody in particular, but as a whole, I think we need to do better.
Thank you, Alder Stevens. Anyone else have anything else they would like to add for our discussion on the council budget goals and objectives for 2022? Okay, Eric, you're good?
All right, thank you.
All right, the next item on our agenda is number 4, the proposed organizational chart for Public Works. We'll turn it over to either Eric or Jared Holter, whoever wants to talk.
I'm talking a lot.
Right.
Combination of both.
Okay, as last week presented, there was a org chart. Excuse me, let me start over. Last week, we presented to you an org chart for the Public Works Department as well as the Parks and Rec Department. We requested that we pull off until this week the Public Works Department for some tweaks. Some tweaks were made on the chart as presented to you today. With my apologies, I thought I had sent it yesterday. I did not. I only sent it to Stacy to add to the agenda item. Alder Stevens, I will do the mea culpa. This time it was my fault, no one else's fault for not being distributed in a more timely fashion. But to speak to the org chart, I'll let Jared take that away.
Okay. So you had the org chart at the F&P meeting dated April 28th, 2021. When I went through that chart, as you know, the Public Works Department has been working on a unified command structure, trying to get multiple departments working together to try and maximize our resources in the department. With that, we came forward over the years and have had different organizational structures. And with the retirement of our Public Works manager, we knew that upcoming earlier in the year, we knew that we had to work on the organizational chart. Started that work back in November, December of 2020. Worked on it through the spring, have come up with multiple models of an org chart. And when I submitted the org chart on dated April 28th, 2021, I was trying to split the duties into two flatter structures. With that, once we received more input and working with the city administrator, we actually refined it from the last April 28th, 2021 org chart to the May 17th, 2021 org chart. And if you'd like me to, I can just go through some of those changes that from the April 28th org chart to what you see in front of you today. So with that, we actually eliminated the Assistant Director of Public Works, Financial Management and Administration.
Jared, if I may ask, could you talk just a little bit slower? Because we didn't get this until 4 o'clock today.
Okay.
And I have not had the opportunity to speak with anyone about this, and I have a migraine right now. So if you could just talk a little bit slower. Because right now I'm honest, I'm not pleased that I got this so late because
If anyone has questions, we can address them right here. And Jared, maybe just start at the top and summarize your way down and do like a whole recap.
Okay.
So that everyone's on the same page rather than trying to jump ahead.
Okay. So the org chart dated May 17, 2021, obviously starts with the city administrator at the top, has myself below that, and then we've got 3 different staff members reporting to me. So the first one below myself as a city engineer, director of public works, would be the assistant city engineer, which is on the left-hand column. Below that is the contracted solid waste services. So that would be the engineering side of what the public works department does, and also keeping track of all the solid waste services. In our department, with the staffing changes earlier in the year, we lost our administrative assistant, so I'm giving some of those duties to the assistant city engineer to keep track of the solid waste services. To the right, we have the GIS and asset manager. We also have underneath that individual, the GIS seasonal. We do have a GIS seasonal individual. And then I'm proposing to put the IT support specialist and the contracted IT support under the GIS asset manager to then report to me. So there would be another layer between myself and the IT department. As you know, in our current structure, the IT department kind of got lathered on at the end, kind of multiple layers below. So I'm trying to move it up the org chart somewhat from what we have currently. Then the next one going down, straight down from myself, be the Assistant Director of Public Works Operations. This would be a new position. With that, we did move some of the operations from the previous org chart to go under the Public Works Superintendents. So we would then have the Public Works Operations individual with 4 different staff members reporting to them. We'll start on the left with the green box. We'll have 2 Public Works Superintendents. And then under that, we would have the Public Works staff, which would be 1, 2s, and 3s. So we'd be proposing to base our job descriptions on duties and qualifications for those individuals and have 3 qualifications instead of 2 that we currently have. Then we'd have the Public Works seasonal under that. Also under the Public Works Superintendent, we'd have the cross connection meter person, along with the cemetery Public Works person. So those are kind of 2 independent functions that happen, and then some seasonal staff under the cemetery. Proceeding to the right, under the Assistant Director of Public Works Operations, we have the Public Works Lead Mechanics Fleet Supervisor with the other mechanic below them. This is the same as it was in the previous organizational chart. Then we also have the Water Quality Lab Supervisor with the Lab Assistant Public Works Operator below them. And this is the same as it was in the other organizational chart. Then in the far right on the bottom corner, I'm actually proposing to have an office customer service manager to take some of those duties that would have been in the April 28th job chart from the Assistant Director of Public Works Financial Management, and to oversee the utility Public Works accounting clerks, which would be the utility billing and the finance purchasing in the Public Works Department. So with that, that's kind of a quick overview of the positions you see in the May 17th chart. I guess I could open up for questions or.
Okay, Alder Burmaster?
I just have one question there. Is there any increase in staffing, or is it just kind of rearranging the same number of people into a different title?
Correct. So. Yeah, it's actually a decrease because Jim Prindle, our current utility Public Works manager, is not being replaced. That position was only budgeted through June. So we're taking the staffing that we have as of the second half of the year, and that's what's making up this chart.
And then the only other concern I have is for budgeting purposes, with the creation of new job descriptions, which would need to be scored. How confident are we that we would be staying kind of within the same budget figures that we had for wages? Are we anticipating any increases in the wages?
Okay, Eric, go ahead.
I can answer that. No, with the wage savings from the one person that is retiring, Jim Prindle, that should be sufficient to cover any wage increases from the remaining staff. So it'd be one less person. There are adjustments to make sure the duties are scored appropriately in the job descriptions. There will likely be, on an individual basis, wage increases for people that are here to be in line with those new duties. But overall, I anticipate that being under the same budget that we would have for this year.
Jared?
I would also add that with our current organizational chart, when the compensation study was completed, there were deficiencies in the organizational chart as far as what was getting done and by what individuals, in the fact that we had so much management going down to individuals that were not labeled properly or job descriptions were not properly done, that they were undervalued and underscored. So it'll be imperative that through this new organizational chart, the job descriptions are properly scored and the job descriptions are properly written and scored properly to ensure that we have the proper duties that are being done by the positions.
Thank you. Alder Stevens?
So maybe as a follow-up to that point, Are existing positions that we have now, would they be regraded? So for example, there's a position on the old chart that had one seasonal, but now looks like has 3 reports underneath it. So is that kind of more of a supervisory role that would change the salary for that position?
Correct. All the job
What I'm
descriptions.
looking at is a GIS asset manager on the old chart just had the seasonal, but now has IT. And I guess the contracted support is maybe not a report, but a responsibility at least.
Correct. That's part of when we went through this, we did not start any job descriptions because we wanted to make sure we had the organizational chart get approved and get it to the point that we were confident in moving forward with it. Because we want to rate those job descriptions with what needs that job has. So I would agree that if there's more management duties or items like that, then it will have to get scored higher. It's just like the Assistant Director of Public Works Operations actually ended up with more under it than it did in the first job chart dated April 28th.
Do we have any ideas, kind of a percentage of the budget that those increases would, what's that going to impact us, I guess, is what I'm asking.
I think going back to what City Administrator referred to was the fact that we're not backfilling the one position. I think with what we had previously, it'll be very similar with our positions, but I think the new organizational chart will probably have some increases that'll be more for what people should have been made. The job description should have been written for previously anyway, for the duties that they're actually performing.
Jared, when is your goal for, if this were to be approved, when would you implement it?
I think with working with the city administrator and our HR department, we'd have to write job descriptions and do the scoring. I'd like to have it done by the next council meeting, but I think that'd be probably trying to fly myself to the moon too, but.
Well, I'm just listening to the council and hearing what everyone's saying. I think that and correct me if you disagree, but while the council is basically supportive of, wants to support your reorganization plan, we would like to know what the financial impact is before fully endorsing it. Is that what I'm hearing? Rather than we think it might be, and I understand you don't know yet because there's all these moving pieces. Eric?
The attempt here, both Parks and Rec and Board of Public Works, is to right-size the process for org charts and job descriptions. We've historically done it pretty much backwards. We've had positions, we've wrote job descriptions, we've met people, we've looked at their job skills, created jobs for them, and then, okay, who you report to, and have the org chart. What we're trying to do here is, what are the functions that the departments are responsible for? How does it best work under our budget constraints, and how does it best work with the number of personnel that we have? Put a org chart that respects those paradigms that we have, as well as the number of people we have and the type of tasks we have to perform. Then once approved, that drives then the job descriptions to, all right, this is how we envision this working best. Now, what are the specific tasks that each job has to do? That then leads the scoring of the positions, and that then leads to the ultimate budget. What we're saying is that it's not approved unless it meets very specific budget numbers. We're actually flipping it back on its head again. We're going to say, here's a dollar amount. We don't know exactly how the most efficient way of using staff and personnel is, but make it work with that number. The driving factor between how many different versions of this we've gone through, 6 months worth of it is, what is the best organization for the number of people that we have? It was not, and I'll be honest about this, it is not what is the best dollar amount for the organization that we have. And so it's a simple request, and I do understand the request for making sure it fits the budget. I have no issue with that. But I'm also saying it's also very confident that this meets it because you're taking away the number 3 highest earner in Public Works, number two high earner in Public Works, and being able to spread those expenses throughout the entire department now. But without hiring anybody else, there's no benefit cost to that. So the 100% of the benefit costs are saved, and 100% of the wages can be spread throughout the department. I have no doubt that this will absolutely fit that. And if you're requesting us that you're not granting approval until then, that is fine. But you may have to see yet another version of this at some point in time. In the meantime, we have retirement. The retirement's going to be before this council meets again. The department and staff deserve to know who they report to and what they report to prior to that. We can do that. We can assign somebody under other duties as assigned in the meantime, and we're willing to look at that. But we're saying it fits the budget, and I'm confident it'll fit the budget. And if you wish to wait, then we'll wait and we'll look at it later on. But that's been the driving factor the whole time is it has to meet the budget, yes, but what is the best organization for the personnel that we have?
Counselors? Alder Stevens?
I think I just want to reinforce that I don't know that we need specifics. We just are looking for the general concept and don't want to be caught with our pants down and have you come back later and say, well, this was reclassified, so now the budget's blown and, you know, you got to do something about it. So I think we're just, you know, if it's about a wash or very similar to what we have now, I'm okay with that. And that's why I was looking for that.
And this will actually be 2 positions down from a year ago. Jared is the one has not made a request for his position back, which other layoffs, Parks and Rec, Police and Fire, you've heard that already. Jared does not ask for that back yet. He's losing a retiree. He's truly doing more with less compared to any other department right now. I just wish to recognize that for Jared and thank him for that.
Thank you, Jared. Anyone else? Alder Wolf?
Thank you, Your Honor. So Jared, so I've heard where it's been like a 6-month process, plus or minus trying to arrive, because I understand there's been a lot of versions, and I certainly understand because I'm guessing permanent staff up there and some of the seasonal represents at least 25% of our workforce, or there. I mean, you know, there's a large percentage of our workforce up at the Works building. So when I look at the April 28th version, we were looking at that there was going to be an operations side and more of a financial side. So could you please help me understand kind of how we went from that to what is before us tonight? Because there seems to be a shift. And that's what I'm trying to grasp because I just got this. So I'm not following quite.
Let's have Eric address that question.
The tasks are still there. They're not being eliminated. The financial and the operations sides are still there. But I'll be honest that in creating this position, both Jared and I committed what is my number one sin, and that is creating a position for an individual. And so really looking at sort of the operations side and the administrative side, financial side of that, the reason we asked for tweaks is that there likely wasn't enough for that individual to really have that same level of position. So those tasks that Jared pointed out here, sort of the more technical, the paperwork, the compliance, that goes to the office customer service manager position. But as it's not really a same level of requirements that we would have for the assistant director position that now reports to the current or the proposed assistant director of public works. So the division is still sort of there, but I think it more reflects the efficient and streamlined version of a public works vision that we have.
And as a follow-up, what is the difference between the colors? I mean, I understand the black is going to be the contracted, I'm assuming contracted solid waste services is Harder's, contracted IT support is MCS.
That's correct currently.
Okay. And so what is the difference between the blue and the green?
It would be hourly versus the salaried positions. We'll still have to review that through the job descriptions to confirm. I don't know the public works superintendents, what they will fall into as far as what job classification, whether they'll be hourly or salaried.
Thank you.
It's what we anticipate. That has not been run through HR yet.
Okay, Alder Smith?
I just like to say, I like this one better. I mean, I think the last one, we discussed about, I mean, all the operations side as the accountability kind of funneling up through that. And also I think, Jared, it helps you to have those 3 direct reports, but not being bombarded with so many other things going on as have had in the past. So I struggled with the last one. I know I asked a bunch of questions on that, but I think this one really looks much more streamlined. Where you're really focusing on operational people, doing operational stuff, but feeding up to you. And then the other ones are specialty areas, but I like this concept. My only concern is what we've said before is, ranking this out, making sure that we're staying in line with the replacements would be my only concern. But I think this really does have a good look to it.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
When do we need to vote on this? At the next, will this be on the next?
I think they would like us to vote on it now. That's why we have it on the agenda. Correct?
My preference would be yes, but Alder Wolf's point is well made that you've only seen it since 4 o'clock this afternoon. It was on the electronic version of the agenda, but not paper as of yesterday, and you did not receive it directly.
So whatever the council wants to do. Thanks, Jared.
I'll make a motion that we approve the concept that Jared and Eric presented here with the constraint that we have to have it fall within the financial affordability of the replacement people, that, the reclassifications of the positions are not over the cost of implementing this organizational chart.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor by Alder Smith, seconded by Alder Knott, to approve the concept of the organizational chart. Discussion. Alder Olson?
Would you like a money factor on that, Tom? The difference between the new and the old?
Not to exceed it. That's what I kind of really said. It's not to
Put the
exceed it at
cap
this
on there.
point. I said not to exceed what the replacement people would be. I think, in fairness, I think we have to leave it at that point, at this point.
Yeah, the amendment, as I understood it, was that it would be cost neutral.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to say
Budget,
it. Agreed. Good point.
budget neutral from the existing structure. Is that okay, Eric? Okay.
Yep.
We'll just have that as a clarification to the way the motion was stated. Okay, Alder Stevens.
In the event that it's not budget neutral, I'm not necessarily against this, but I think I'd be more comfortable if we had the information first. I mean, even if it was a 3% increase or something like that, I think we're maybe potentially setting ourselves up for a pitfall. This might make sense to refer to the June meeting, and then we can have a number, and then we can vote on this with definition.
Well, wouldn't we have to approve the job descriptions? Anyway? Eric, go ahead.
Yes, the process of writing the job descriptions and scoring those job positions will give us those numbers that we'll be presenting one way or the other. So either one, and I would say, if you prove this a concept, let's expect the July meeting. I think June is a lot to ask for our new HR manager to learn with me as well. We'll write it before the July meeting. But we can present at that time, either one, what is the overage, if there is an overage, or two, does it truly meet the requirements of the motion today, and then you can approve it. But that very process will tell us that, yes. Where we stand.
So can we approve this kind of in concept and then vote on it?
That's what we did.
I'm
I will get to him.
I'm good.
Okay. All right, Alder Knott?
Yeah, no, my understanding is if we approve this motion, that it is budget neutral. If they find out in the future that it is not budget neutral, they will have to come back to us anyway, because they'd be in violation of what we approved.
That's a good point.
Okay. All right, any other discussion? Alder Wolf?
Thank you, Your Honor. I fully support the reorg of Public Works. I will not be standing in the way of this moving forward, but I will not be voting no, but I will be abstaining this evening. And I will be following up with both Eric and Jared just for more information. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions? The motion on the floor is to approve the reorganizational chart concept that was shown us today with the understanding that it is budget neutral. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously with one abstention.
I abstain. Thank you.
Okay, item 6, contracted services for A, recruitment of a new financial service director, and B, interim financial services. Eric?
Thank you very much. Amanda, do you want to input anything or should I start?
You can start.
Okay. Last week, we did interview 2 candidates for the financial services director position. Unfortunately, in the process of 3 months, we only have those 2 candidates to choose from. I do not feel that's really a deep enough pool to replace someone who's been here for 40 years. And at this point, I'm requesting that we look for contracted services for 2 things. One would be to do a nationwide search to perhaps hit those places we were not able to hit when it came to marketing or recruitment. And 2, to look for someone to do similar to what we did in HR office, but provide temporary financial services upon Fred's retirement until such time that we hire someone. Feelers went out last week. We had some feedback today from some organizations, but we do not have any quotes yet. So I anticipate getting those quotes later. So at this point in time, I'm just seeking direction if that's something that the council would entertain. Obviously not agreeing to any dollar amounts or any contracts at this time. We'd have to bring that back probably in the June meeting if we did have something to do. But if that's not something you wish to entertain, this would be a good time to know before we proceed in working with those companies.
Okay, thank you. Alder Knott?
So what would be the term or the duration of this contract? Would it be open-ended until you can find a suitable full-time staff member? Or would it be for 6 months, a year until how would you do that?
Generally, they look for 3 to 4 months max for those type positions. Again, you're going to get people either, mid-career change or tires that are looking for, short-term work and are willing to be here for that length of time, but not long-term. It would just be generally 3 to 4 months what they look for.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Alder Stevens?
I guess I was a little confused. My understanding was Fred would be retiring later in the fall. So well, 2 things. Am I wrong? Did this get moved up on us? And then the second, I don't have a problem with the recruitment of a interim entity to take care of it. I mean, this is a very vital role to the functioning of the city. Is there any way that we could ask Fred to not retire or pay him contractually for a few more months? I mean,
He had a nightmare about this.
he could say no, but have we asked?
I think Fred's neck is sore from shaking his head back and forth no. You can see by his reaction, he has no intention of sticking around. I think he's already enjoying his retirement and his well-deserved retirement in 40 years. As for the dates, those that retire from service here are allowed their vacation payouts, correct? Which Fred will be gaining. So his last day will be, you want to announce it, Fred?
Last working day.
June. Oh.
It will be the last day of actual work in the office, and the rest will be on payroll while he is working off his vacation until his actual retirement date.
So when I was thinking September, that's the official date. It's just the realistic date for us is much sooner. Okay.
Bit of history. The position was posted in March 1st.
Do you want me to go over kind of the history of the posting?
I'm gonna go over a little bit so you can interrupt as we go, please. That's all right, because I'm gonna get it wrong. So March was the initial posting dates. Expected a few responses, got very few at all. Probably had our first qualified candidate in April, probably. Only 12 total candidates applied for the position. But we haven't been sitting on our hands for those months, even after recognizing that we weren't getting a good turnaround, increased the amounts of posting the spots, including paid spots, which I'm generally opposed to. I don't think they're very effective, but hey, when you're desperate, let's do it. To the point of even calling anybody I've ever met that has any interest in finance from any place I've been at before. So trying to use my personal network to get some input as well, or at least some buy-in and some applicants. So just not a real deep pool. Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much covers it. We posted it in kind of all of the normal places that we would normally post immediately. So we posted on like the UW system, the city's website, GovJobs, and then we did actually pay to advertise it on Indeed, another government job site, and then we also coordinated with the local Wisconsin finance. You know, kind of each industry has its own organization. And so we reached out to those in Wisconsin. I think Fred can give you the specific-
WGFOA, the Wisconsin Government Finance Officers Association.
Yeah, and then there was another one that we reached out to and they posted on theirs as well. And so it was out a lot of places, but of the 12, candidates that we had, only 2 were really borderline qualified. And of the remaining ones, I mean, quite honestly, several didn't even have a financial background. I mean, I think that, it was just a matter of, it was a job and they hit apply, but had really little, background that was relevant, which is unfortunate. I mean, but also if you go out there, we're not the only municipality looking for a finance director right now. And there is a shortage statewide really of both finance directors and clerks. And a lot of municipalities are struggling to fill those positions.
Is our salary competitive? I mean, if we increase the salary, would we attract better applicants?
One thing we did do is within the existing salary range is post higher in the range than the minimum, and without success with that either. But that could be one of those considerations. Habco did mention to Fred, so I'm passing this along third hand now, but they're struggling to hire even out of college for their entry level. So it's finance, throughout is a field that has some struggles right now.
Okay, anybody else? Alder Burmaster?
I do want to say that I will support these, because I do think our financial director is a very important position here, and it's going to leave a big void in our organization. I do have a little bit of dissatisfaction though, because this council did approve to hire an HR person to do recruiting. And I mean, that was part of the recruiting process. And I think knowing this now, we're going to have to take this into account, that when we do have those retirements, we're going to have to be giving it enough time, because obviously this wasn't adequate enough time to fill this position, because I'm kind of upset now that we have to spend more money to go through this process. But on the other hand, it's necessary and we have to do it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Alder Stevens?
Budget, like an overlap? I mean, Fred would be able to train the replacement. I mean, so that's money found, right?
We did identify a plan for 4 months overlap, 3 months overlap.
That's from September.
4 months,
4
4 months
months.
overlap of 2. So there is some savings there for that. But again, that was designed so that we could have somebody in place learning from Fred. And, but
Okay, anyone else? If you're ready, we need to have we don't have a motion on the floor that I'm aware of, unless I
will make a motion that we approve the contracted services for an interim financial services director.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor by Alder Stevens, seconded by Alder Knott, to approve the recruitment of a new contracted financial services director. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Back to you, Eric, I think, or no? We're good.
Nope, we should be
Is
good.
there any more?
We did number 5 already, so.
We
we're-
didn't
Okay.
do now A, though. We just did the financial services, right?
Yeah. I've got it all checked off.
So you think that that will cover the
Oh,
recruitment? will cover-
when I introduced it, I kind of spoke to both A and B at once, that we're looking for 2 services. I guess let's review the motion. The motion from Dan was to for hire recruiter, or was it do both?
So,
maybe I-
well, it was just for the latter, but I guess I assume that we were actively engaged in the recruitment of a director and we still are. So I can make a motion if that would please the city.
I guess I misunderstood what the motion was for. I
Yep.
thought the motion was to pursue a contract for an interim financial services director. Is that what the motion was for?
That's what the motion was for. I believe that's what we voted on. So
now-
there's six.
That would
6A is just to fill the position in general, but
6A would be to hire a recruiter to assist us. in filling the
Oh, okay.
position.
So our
That's what
motion was
Alder
actually
Burmaster is referring
for
to.
item B. The motion
Yes.
we made was for item B. So for item A, hiring the recruiter, is that we want to do that too?
Yes.
So what they're saying is they've been trying to find someone to permanently fill the position and haven't been able to do it. So the staff would like to hire someone to help recruit applicants for the position.
Do we have money in the budget to do that?
we have 4 months of double Fred. That's not going to be spent. I would think so.
I can't answer that until I get some responses back from I get the proposals back from my RFP that I put out to the firms that would do that for government services. You know, I couldn't ballpark it to you how much it costs right now. But again, any agreement that comes back will come back to the council before we hire someone. The intent here is concept of if you're in favor of this or not, in general.
And alternatively, what else are we gonna do?
I'll make a motion to move forward the contracted service with the recruitment of a new financial services director with the understanding that if we get the pricing and the contracts, they will be coming back to council for approval.
Don't we already have a motion on the floor?
We already voted on
Oh,
it.
that one got
Separate item.
voted on.
Oh, never mind, obviously.
The other
Long
one
night.
was hire it
Sorry.
interim. Now we're talking about recruitment. Okay, so the motion on the floor now is to pursue hiring someone to recruit a new financial services director. The motion was by Carrie Burmaster and the second was by Jim Olson, I think. Okay, any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. Item 7.
Motion to adjourn.
Who was it? It was Dan Stevens? No? Jim?
All night here.
Jim Olson? Okay, motion by Jim Olson, seconded by Diane Wolf to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The time is